our News from the Hill segment tonight. President Trump's refugee executive order was just hit by a new legal setback. A U.S. district judge in Virginia has ruled that President Donald Trump's executive order barring entry from 7 countries is unconstitutional. The judge cited several of Mr. Trump's campaign statements, including those in which he promised to create a Muslim ban, as the reason for the ruling. With me now, Congressman from Texas, Babin. Congressman, thanks so much for being here, sir.
Great to be with you, Liz.
All right, Congressman, let me ask you, this new ruling from the district court in Virginia, how bad of a setback is this for the Trump administration?
Hey, you know what? It's a setback for the American people. It's exactly what it is. This is a desperately needed executive order, and for the federal courts to step in and continue to throw roadblocks in front of some of these executive orders the way they're doing, I think is endangering the American people. You know, I heard Judge Robart, which was in his executive order in Washington State when this happened last week, said that none of these people that he knew of had ever been committed any kind of a terrorist act from these 7 nations. Well, we've checked, and 72 people from these 7 countries have been convicted of terrorist acts, including one in my district in Houston. An Iraqi refugee was arrested for planning to blow up shopping malls. So to me, this is a very, very, I think it's a dangerous precedent for these courts federal courts to be stepping in and infringing upon the authority of the U.S. president to keep us safe. He's got that authority. We've looked into it, and for this to happen, I think, is a shame. And I just hope that it doesn't cause some great harm to come to our American citizens.
Right. And what strikes me is that the claim from the judges about the fact that they say that no people from these 7 nations have committed any acts of terror or acts of violence against the American people. Not only, like you said, is that a terrible error, 72 people have. It's actually, Congressman, I think it's irrelevant what's happened in the past. We know this is a threat that's facing us in the future. We know that from the CIA. We know that from the FBI. They've told us this was going to happen. And to me, it doesn't seem to be smart policy or anything like the United States has ever operated when it comes to national security to only look at what has happened and not look at the threat that's going to face us in the future.
I couldn't agree more, Liz. I mean, we're looking at, if we look back over the past, numerous American presidents have utilized this authority and power to stop certain folks from coming in from different nations that were a danger to our national security. Jimmy Carter comes to mind. When I was serving in the Air Force, as a matter of fact, during the Iranian hostage crisis, he invoked this power. Even Barack Obama has done so. It is not a Muslim ban. It is ridiculous. It is ludicrous to say this is a Muslim ban. And to take something that was said during a campaign by a politician and introduce that into something like this in a federal courtroom, it's just unprecedented. And it's not a Muslim ban. There are 46 Muslim majority countries in the world. These are 7. Many Muslims are able to come into this country from these other nations, and also these 7 countries were not really even chosen out of thin air by President Trump or his administration. These are 7 countries that were named by the Obama administration. By no stretch of the imagination is this a Muslim ban, and no stretch of the imagination, and I'm not even an attorney, and we have seen a number of presidents, as I said, have utilized this authority. It is not unprecedented. It is in law. It's settled law, and it is a very, very dangerous precedent to be setting.
Right, I think like the policy or dislike the policy, it's absurd to suggest that it's a Muslim ban when 85% of the world's Muslims aren't impacted by it in any way. I mean, you don't have to like the ban, but don't misrepresent it, because that just stokes fear in American Muslims and peaceful Muslims around the world. Congressman, I want to ask you a question, though. This is about something that you've said at a different time. Critics say that this type of moratorium on refugees or immigration is the first step, they say, to internment camps. They point to what the United States did to Japanese Americans during World War II. You say, though, that this type of temporary moratorium on refugees is not a radical idea. Can you speak to that for us?
It's not a radical idea. And quite frankly, let me just say this. I don't have anything against refugees. You know, I come from refugees in my past, in my family tree. Most of us have in this country. Unless you're a Native American, you came from refugees. But it's the process here. It's not the refugees, it's the process. The vetting cannot be done properly. The FBI director has told us in classified briefings. The former Secretary of Homeland Security told us in classified briefings last year that they could not vet these people. These 7 nations, well, again, were not chosen out of thin air by President Trump. They were chosen by President Obama and his administration. They're failed states, or they are enemies of the United States. The Iranians, well, it's no secret that they are the largest exporter of terrorism in the country today. The other 6 are failed states. They have no single central repository of data and information on their citizens. And so for that reason, it just stands to reason. It's just common sense. You know, our first duty as elected officials is to keep America safe, enhance our national security. So enhance these vetting processes. And so I think it's very reasonable for President Trump to have a temporary ban on people coming in from these failed states where there's no information, no way to check. And his own FBI director and the former Secretary of Homeland Security, as I just said, have told us in the past they could not vet from countries like Iraq.
Right, and going back to what you said before,
Syria,
it's pretty obvious that these 7 nations weren't picked because they're Muslim majority nations. They were picked because what the 7 nations have in common is they're enemies of the United States, or they are torn apart by jihadi violence. Or like Iran, they have crowds, they have mobs in the streets chanting death to America and burning American flags here. This is not based off of their religion. This is based off of their intent and the practicality of vetting people from those nations. Congressman, before we go, let me ask you one last question. There are reports that President Trump is going to respond to these legal setbacks to his current immigration order by issuing new orders, either one or separate ones, to deal with the different aspects of the order individually. If that's the way he goes, what do you see that looking like? What will he change to make sure that it gets through the legal system the second time around?
You know, I am not an attorney, but I will say that I'm understanding that this is one of their avenues and one of their approaches, because we're one justice shy on the Supreme Court, and so I can understand their reluctance to take this to the Supreme Court when there's only 8 justices. The sad part about it is if this is codified into law and settled law at the Supreme Court level, then the United States has lost a real powerful tool in the hands of our president to keep us safe. And so I can understand why he may not want to take that route until we get another Judge Gorsuch appointed to the Supreme Court, and may want to do so by rewriting his executive order. And I assume what he might do is just try to comply with some of the issues that these federal judges have raised. I disagree with the whole thing, quite frankly, with what these judges have done, and especially with the Ninth Circuit Court, one of the most liberal, in fact, the most liberal circuit appellate court in the federal system. I think they're routinely overturned at the Supreme Court level about 86% of the time, or somewhere in that neighborhood. But you know, we have several options to take, and I assume that the Trump administration has really considered this, and this is why they're going to move forward, possibly with a new executive order.
Right, because I think a lot of times people forget, too, that this order isn't indefinite, that the moratorium on refugees was 90 days from some countries and 100 days from some of the other countries, indefinitely for Syrian refugees, but it has its time limit, too. Congressman Babin, we're out of time. Thank you so much for being on the show, sir. I appreciate it.